Hi everyone and welcome back to another Monday guide. Today I will go through something I've been thinking about for a very long time, namely, is it a good idea to have armored recon or armored cars in an infantry template? There's this ongoing argument that you should avoid having armored recon or armored cars in, for example, marine templates or mountaineer templates, or any kind of infantry template that you intend to attack with, because running out of fuel is a very bad thing. So today I will stress test that argument and see what happens if you run out of fuel, if you run out of supply, and you try to attack with those kind of templates. So yeah, and the result was very interesting, and I didn't really expect exactly that outcome. Alright, so here's the design of the test and what I intend to do. So I'm playing Italy right now, and for this test I have designed 3 different templates. So first up is the horses. It's basically just a marine template with some marines and with cavalry, recon and engineer company. So the point is with this is that it's a marine template without any fuel usage or fuel capacity. So no fuel in this marine template. The second one is the same template, but I switched the cavalry recon to armored recon. So this template uses fuel. So 1.78 and fuel capacity of 100. So everything else is the same between those two. And that's then just to kind of throw in something else into the mix when I try it is more like one of the starting templates that Italy starts with. So like a classical light tank template with some light tanks and some motorized. And yes, the templates are very bad. Don't comment the design of the templates. I just want to isolate what I'm gonna test. And that is with or without fuel consumption when I attack. So, with these 3 different templates, I will run into hostile territory into Egypt, and then I will take a fight in Cairo against the Brits. And what I will look at is what happens when I start having bad supply, bad fuel, and then my movement speed and my combat stats. That's like basically what the test is all about. And then I will try to draw some conclusions on what happens. So yeah, let's see what happens basically. All right, the day is here. Let's launch the attack. Oh, but before I do that, I'm gonna start off by saying I'm gonna look fully at the movement speed, and then after that I'm gonna do a test regarding the combat stats. So, and if you haven't watched Boppus's guide on fuel consumption and how fuel and supply works, please do, because that will explain a lot to you. But basically, when I hover these 3 different templates, you can see that I have supply status 150 stored out of 100 on all 3. And then you see that these 4 ones in the bottom, the marines with armored recon and light tanks, they also have these fuel drum symbols. And that means that they have a current fuel. The first 2 ones a current fuel of 100 and they burn maximum 42 per day. And light tanks, they have a maximum 576 and they burn maximum 244 per day. So that's basically 2 different mechanics that you have to keep an eye on. So the supply status and the fuel status, basically. So now let's just push into hostile territory and see what happens. We're just gonna walk down the Nile now and see what happens to the different units' movement speed. So if we start off by looking at the light tanks, because they are gonna be the ones running first and point into the enemy. So you can see here that the fuel is going down quickly, but they are really quick. So the movement speed is 5.6, the original speed was 7, and the other 2 templates was 4 and 4. But they are doing fine. So right now, everyone is just doing along, even though you see that the supply is 141 on the ones behind, and the one in the front, the supply is still above 100. So that's what's happening right now. Let's just run in and see what happens when the fuel goes to 0 or the supply goes to minus, if that affects the movement speed. So now you can see the movement speed, it started to drop, and this is it. So lack of fuel, minus 60%, that's the cap, and that's correlating perfectly to current fuel 0. So if you hit 0 fuel, the movement speed gets a hit on 60%. So these light tanks now will move in snail speed. So that's what's going to happen with them. So then we have the 2 other templates back still in the race. So we look at the Marines with armored recon and the ones without. So they are equally fast. Or the ones with armored recon, they have a slight buff on 10% because of the armored recon thing. But they have the same speed basically. And now the ones with armored, they still have a bit of fuel. So they are still in the game. So see what happens now when they start running out of fuel. So the fuel is 0 now on the Marines with armored recon. The supply consumption is still 130. And the other ones, they are still in good supply. So both have good supply, but one is out of fuel. And that means, yeah, minus 60% on that one as well. While the horses, who are the slowest, they are still in good shape. So this is, actually this is turning into a race. So now we clicked everyone down here. So yes, so now you can draw the conclusion that the horses will win the race. Because they are still in good speed, while the quickest ones are in 1 kilometer per hour. They're really bad off. And I can see that the supply is also starting to hit them, because the supply status is down on 15% on the tanks. The Marines, they are also down on 15%. So everyone, these are lagging behind, so they don't, yeah, they are also crashing now, supply status. But basically the horses, they are winning the race, because they are just the ones that can still move in decent speed. Even though they are really bad off in supply, they can still move okay. So if I just continue to snake down here, they will be doing quite okay. 2.4, which is really okay for having no supply whatsoever. And they're just running down the Nile like this. 3 in speed. Now they gain some local supply. And so on. While the other ones are, yeah, both really, really slow. So, okay, let's do one more thing before I draw conclusions. Let's also hit the extra supply buttons and see what happens. Because that could be an argument that someone would say in the comment field now. So now I click on that. Everyone is back on a stored 150 supply. But no fuel. Because getting extra supplies doesn't mean getting extra fuel. So if we continue run down the Nile, it changes actually nothing. Or I mean, the first ones, they are still a bit quicker because they don't get the negatives of supply. So the horses are still running at full speed. While the other ones are still as slow, because even though they got supply, they didn't get any fuel. So it doesn't really affect them whatsoever. So, conclusion number 1, movement speed. Big argument for not having any kind of armored or recon or anything that needs fuel. Because the second you run out of fuel, and that's not correlating to supply, then you're in a very bad position. You can still pull back with strategic redeployment. So if I take these 2 in the back and I pull back and look at the movement speed, they are still really quick. So even though you don't have any supply, you can still do the strategic redeployment backwards. And that's okay, even though you have 0 fuel. But you can't do that offensively, going attacking someone. And if you're being attacked while doing that, that's also a very bad thing, because then it gets cancelled. But that's like a saving grace. But for attacking, you don't want to have any kind of fuel in your template. Before moving on to the next part, I just want to take a short moment of your time and say that most of you watching this are yet not subscribers to our channel. So please hit that subscribe button if you want to have a new guide from me and Boppus every Monday. If you really like what we do, then you can also consider becoming a patron. Then you would get a full archive of Patreon exclusive guides and additional guides every second week. Check it out, it's in the description here somewhere. Yeah, let's continue. Alright, so the second thing I'm going to do is then to test the combat stats and how fuel and supply affects the combat value in a fight. But before doing that, we have to keep an eye out for something, and that is the base stat. When these units are fully loaded with full supply stored, what's their stats? And then we're going to look at it later and then in fight. So we're both going to look at the base stats and the modifiers in the combat. So the horses with armored recon, they have 58.8. Let's just use soft attack as a comparison. 58.8. The Marines with armored recon, they have 63.8. So a little bit more, thanks to the armored recons. And light tanks, they have 77.9. So 58, 63, and 77. Let's just keep those three numbers in our head. So let's get these units fully out of supply and out of fuel and get them to Cairo. AI off. So here we go again. Supply is 0 fuel, and supply is really bad on all of them. So let's get into position. And there we go. Let's take one each of each type. And let's attack. Okay, so now we have a fight. So all these three units now have no supply if they, so all of them have bad supply. So we're on 24%, 24%, and 24%. So the same kind of supply status. Two of them have 0 fuel. All right, so let's start by looking at the fight. So at first glance, it looks like, okay, the soft attack has minus 18.9 of the horses, minus 18.9 on the horses with armored recon, minus 18.9 on the tanks. So the same have the same minus modifier, all of them. So that looks identical. Breakthrough 49.3, 49.3. Okay, I think that's slightly more. That must be that they have stored 23%, 23. Yeah, okay. So there might be like a marginal difference on how much stored supply they have, depending on when they arrived and so on. So, but it's the same. I think that's what we can conclude. So 49.2, 49.2. Okay, so the same minus modifiers on all stats, basically. But then we see, so low supply, low supply, low supply. Lack of fuel, 0, lack of fuel, 0. So at first glance, it looks like I said, they have the same minus, so it doesn't matter if they have fuel or not. Or does they? So if I now click on the tank template, remember that they had 77 in soft attack. It now has 27 in soft attack. So the base value is absolutely like nothing compared to what it was before. And if I look in the fight, the light tank, correct, the base value is 27. So if I then look at the base value on the armored, the Marines with the armored recon, 56, and it was supposed to have 63 or 64 or something like that. So that has also dropped. And then yeah, the ones without any fuel, the same base value, so it's intact completely. So the stats are completely intact. Yeah, okay. So what does this basically tell us? It means that basically if you go down on 0 fuel in your template, that part of the template that adds stats to that gets affected by that hit. So in the case of the armored, like this template that has mostly fuel consumption stuff, it will get the full hit of the minus lack of fuel debuff on the base stats. On the one that only has one unit out of a template, like a slight part of it has fuel, only that part will get a hit in the stats. And the one unit that has 0 fuel, it will get 0 affectedness on it. So the base stats are fully intact. So you can't only look at the modifier, but you also have to look at the base stat when you look at the battle. So in other words, fighting without fuel is really, 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 really bad. But if you fight with fuel and it's only like when it comes to Marines, it's only that part of the template that adds that extra value that gets affected. So most of the Marine template would still be able to fight without any fuel, even though you don't have any fuel. So if that makes sense. So they're not as affected as a tank template. So what's the conclusion? What have we learned today? So this is the part you jump to right away if you don't want to see the actual test. Well, basically, when it comes to movement speed, which was the first part, if you attack somewhere into territory and you run out of fuel, you'll get super slow. So even though you just have one thing in your template that is fuel consumption, the whole template will slow down like a maximum. It's like a binary thing. So if a tank template that is super quick and then run out of fuel, it gets to like 1 kilometer an hour. If a Marine template has armored recon, it also gets to 1 kilometer an hour. But the Marine template without any fuel consumption, it just keeps on fighting. So it's still quick when it attacks into hostile territory. So for moving into hostile territory, it's very much a good idea to have a template without fuel consumption, because then you can keep on attacking without losing that movement speed. When it comes to the actual fighting, then when it comes to Marines, it only gets affected in the actual fighting on that part of the template that is having fuel. So if you're using armored recon, it's only those extra stats from the armored recon unit that gets that debuff of what is 60% or something like that with no fuel. So it doesn't affect the template that much, but considering that it's also very slow, it's not a good idea. And then you'd probably rather have that armored, armored cavalry recon, because yeah, it's a no-brainer basically. So when you look at it, from like a holistic perspective, is it a good idea to use armored recon or some kind of armor or fuel consumption in a Marine template? Well, in most cases, no. So I think the argument holds from the get-go that you should avoid in special forces to have anything with armored in it, or anything with fuel consumption, because it kills the stats of that unit quite a bit, but it mostly affects the movement speed. But so there are some outlier cases, and that is, for example, if you just want to make sure to get a D-Day landing, then if you land on the side of a port and then attack the port from the sides, so you can still live on that like quick stored up fuel, or if you run out of fuel, it doesn't matter that much, to be honest, then I think it's still worthwhile to just load that unit and make it as heavy as possible. So you kind of treat it like a tank almost. So in that case, it's worthwhile. So if you intend to just make a landing, take a harbor, and then attack with something else, I still think it's worthwhile to have, like, make it the Marine template as heavy as possible and as good as fighting as possible. Or if you're using Mountaineers and you intend to fight like in Central Europe somewhere where there's a lot of fuel hubs, supply hubs everywhere, and you can easily take a step back and get new fuel, then just load that Marine template or Mountaineer template with as much shit as possible to make it as heavy as possible. But if you intend to snake down in Africa, attack on the Eastern Front with special forces or infantry, or like island jump somewhere in the Southeast Asia, then no, don't use anything that uses fuel, because it will slow you down and it will also make the stats worse. So in general, conclusion is avoid it. Don't use armored recon for special forces, because that extra stat you get, in most cases, it will just slow you down and make you fight worse than you would have done with a cavalry recon anyway. You have to consider recon value, but still, I don't think it's worth it. So that's my conclusion to the whole thing. I really hope you guys enjoyed the guide and you learned something new in this guide.